Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fisdap Tips and Tricks webinar. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that due to the volume of attendees, all lines have been muted. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat, and we will save some time at the end to address them. Today's Tips and Tricks topic is Preceptor Management. Our host is David Page. Dave is the director of the UCLA Pre-Hospital Care Research Forum and is one of the founders of Fisdap. So without further delay, I'll pass it off to you, Dave.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be back on. Thanks for inviting me. And it's an honor to discuss this. I think preceptor training is one of the most important parts that's in Fisdap. And we, I think as all programs struggle to make sure that the instructional extenders, if you will, instructors who are actually in the field know what the priorities are for education for our students. I think we as a collective community wanted to improve our ability to both have the preceptor prepared and ready for the student's arrival, but also give them the tools to be a great educator. So it's very fun to actually be able to talk a little bit about the tools that are in Fisdap that were specifically designed for preceptors, and with that in mind, I can begin to share a little bit of what's inside. So in case anybody is familiar or not familiar with how to access some of these things, if you were ever interested in the preceptor training, it shows up here under your learning center, and particularly it's a CAPC approved course. The preceptor training shows up for, you can actually send people a code and assign them to enter the site. The preceptor training section, and I'm going to bring up this window. I've got Windows hell going on, but everybody knows what that's like. Once you log in with your username and password, the instructor, and we called it clinical educator because we weren't sure if some of the FTOs, the field training officers in actual ambulance services, might be able to use this as well. It was a word that I wish we hadn't picked, and when we redo preceptor training, which is coming soon, I'm sure we will go to just a straight preceptor training. But the idea of having the clinical educator was to reinforce the concept that they are actually out there doing education. They're an extender of what we do. And we wanted to give them some basic education. So this 4-hour module is a Moodle that allows them to go through each lesson. And the lessons each have video, and then are accompanied with what we call speed bumps or questions, asking them to complete the quiz. There's, if you will, the learning checks along the way. The nice thing about this is that it generates a certificate. What we usually do is have our preceptors just email us the PDF of the certificate so we know they completed it, and then are able to check them off the list as having received kind of a generic preceptor training. Obviously, this doesn't cover specific paperwork that each program might have, so there is a need to make sure that they're oriented to the actual paperwork that they're going to use to sign people off. But Fisdap is using preceptor sign-off, and so one of the elements that is, I think, essential to discuss in this process is where and how preceptors are able to, when they're in the system, check the boxes that they need to, and that I think is a function of how, when you have preceptor training or sign-offs turned on in your system, these are the same rubrics that the National Registry portfolio were keyed to. We studied these with over 24 different programs and then eventually hundreds of programs to see if we were going to get a good read, because preceptors generally tend to rate everybody as either nearly successful or almost successful, but on a Likert scale from 0 to 5 or 1 to 5, we found that the students were always a 4 and a 5, even if they were starting. But when we changed the rubric and went from a 0, 1, and 2, we could see that the marginal, as in not successful, inconsistent, was actually being marked, and I'll make this much bigger so people can see my screen a little bit easier. So as the preceptors tend to grade marginal, inconsistent, not yet competent, we see the ability of the preceptor to tell us yes or no, this is well done. So this is an example of a training, a very specific feature. You have to request that it be turned on for your program. And if it's turned on, you can orient your preceptors to how to think of unsuccessful, marginal, and successful. We did a video with the National Registry on the out-of-hospital scenario that has some of these ratings and discussions, but this is one of the spots where the student can log in on their mobile app or on a computer or tablet, and the preceptor could, in real time, if they're connected to the internet, either enter a password or enter a signature. And if you're doing it on paper, they could even attach the signature signed on the hard copy. So that's an example of something that's very specific to programs that programs would need to orient their people to even after completing preceptor training. Now, one of the nice things about preceptor training, getting reports about whether or not someone has completed preceptor training, is kind of a feature of the reports section. So when you're looking to find out, gosh, did anybody complete the preceptor training that we assigned, under reports is a very nice little preceptor training completion report. So this helps with the site visit on the day that that you're kind of crunching and feeling like, oh my goodness, like I don't have the information about where and when each preceptor was trained. And here's a good example of how to run that report, showing who has been trained and on what date they completed the training, aside from the fact that you have a PDF certificate if they emailed it to you. You can also generate a PDF and put it in either an electronic or physical folder for the site visit when the site visit is occurring. I will say the preceptors sometimes will tell you that they couldn't just skip through this training. So they're very used to what probably is not so great online education, and we all are exposed to it in some way, shape, or form, and clicking through slides or just advancing to the end and taking the quiz, even if you didn't take the training, is really, really nearly impossible with this, because the speed bumps kind of question whether or not you understood the material right before it, and you really need to have been paying attention to what it was saying and kind of think about it more deeply. So that's definitely one thing that you should be expecting, is that it's 4 hours of training, and it really is 4 hours of training. You could assign just portions of it, like the feedback section, I think is particularly helpful, just talking about smart feedback, specific, meaningful, agreed upon, reality-based, and timely. And that tool, that smart feedback tool, is a fairly nice way to have preceptors just learn to, let the student do what they're doing, give them space to do it, but then be very specific about the types of positive and need for improvement kind of feedback they can give. The additional resources section is something that isn't counted towards the 4 hours. We were playing with some extra features within the Moodle for those preceptors who want to do more, or even staff that are looking to improve their remediation skills and kind of preparing people for what is expected of the student, what is expected of the preceptor, and how to adopt that role. So we welcome any participation in that, by the way. If you're interested, We are due to refresh this, I believe, and I know I've been asked to contribute, but I would love to get a lot more people contributing. So if that's an interest, please send me a note, and we will include you. I think the next thing is just a little tip or trick, because this is about tips and tricks. And that is that many times our students order accounts that include preceptor training in it. And we don't realize that, so preceptor training has a cost to it, but many times if they bought the whole shebang or whatever larger bundle they bought, it's actually bundled with them. And if you want to order them one by one, you can buy new accounts, but sometimes when you're ordering, you can actually view your inventory of unused activation codes. And by unchecking everything and just focusing on preceptor training, you may find that if you search far enough back, and I don't know, this is a total guess, but I'm going to just pretend like I'm going to go back to UCLA's been using this for a long, long time. So I'll just pretend we're going to go back to 2002 and see if there's any kind of preceptor training account left for us to use in the system. This is a total gamble, and it's thinking and working, but sometimes, and we may have actually used them all up here, but you will find activation codes right below here that would be helpful for you to activate some of the existing preceptor codes. So that special inventory is what you're able to do, and I hope that tip and trick sends you looking for other little nooks and crannies where you can find unused activation codes that are very useful for what we do. Moving back over to our slides, and I do want to, I know that the time is limited and we want to allow for questions, so I'm going to be real quick. We've done some research about preceptors and preceptor training, and what I wanted to do is give you a sense. Students can print out a report of their progress and actually bring it to one of their ride-alongs. I think that's usually very useful, and we've tried to see if we could predict which preceptors were more effective and which were not. The first study we did was in 2007, and it showed that, in fact, these lines are going to show you if you have 26% of your ride-alongs with a single preceptor, so a quarter of your ride-alongs are with one, you get to lead more quickly. You also lead more calls in the end. So if you do 80% with a preceptor, you are, again, leading more calls. You're in charge of more percentage of calls. And if you do 80 to 100% of your time with one preceptor, look at the acceleration of this curve and how quickly people get to 70% of the calls they're going to start to lead. So within 10 to 15 calls, they're really actually being placed in charge of patient care. So I do feel pretty confident that that recommending we try to limit the number of preceptors is a good idea. And if you aren't familiar with Eureka Graphs, great study from Wilson in 1991. That's what prompted us to look at, graphing success as an upward swing, failure as a downward swing. You get a little VFib trial and error at the beginning, but then something happens and there's like a big bulb that goes on. So Kim Grubbs from Johnson County Community College, now retired educator and nurse paramedic, said, put this into Fisdap. And when we did, we found the same thing Wilson did, that in fact there's this eureka moment and people really shoot up on performance. The reason I bring this quick orientation of graphs, Eureka Graphs up, is because when we did it with 800 students. We really, feel that we're pretty strongly able to predict that. That's in the portfolio as the 18 out of the last 20 team leads need to be successful. Again, not mentioning any products or anything that would be inappropriate ethically, but the registry really did adopt that sort of same 18 out of the last 20. So look at the performance over a period of time and make sure they reach competency. And so when we look at preceptor graphs of team leadership, these are all keyed off of that same preceptor sign-off. So if you're not doing preceptor sign-off, you won't be able to see these. But if you're doing preceptor sign-off, you can see that students really don't lead very well at the beginning. And we tried to see if we could optimize this using Eureka Graphs. And in 2012, Keith Widmeyer, Marshall Washik, and Todd Cage looked at 313 students. And when we optimized this, we noticed this one best research at the name is P for, I think, educational researcher or poster. But essentially, the fewer preceptors there were, the less time it took and the less number of runs it took to reach Eureka. So, sorry, January 2014 was the second poster, 439 students. And Todd Cage presented that. So if we do, we could reduce it down to about 35 leads if we actually keep our time 90 to 100% with one preceptor. So I hope that's helpful into saying, you know, we have to look at how well our preceptors do. And I know we want questions, so please ask away. In the meantime, while we get those, so use the chat area, the question poll area to engage. But I will say one thing that we did look at as well, and that is that we looked at the preceptor evals and whether students of ethnicity, so diverse ethnicity, all of us have ethnicity, but students of non-Caucasian ethnicity were reporting preceptor interactions that were not as favorable as Caucasian students. And in fact, with over 1,600 students reporting, the students who had the non-Caucasian students reported lower satisfaction on feeling welcomed. They didn't feel like the expectations were communicated as well as some of the Caucasian students. And they didn't feel that the enthusiasm for teaching or comfort level for future rotations was not, you know, very good. So Marilee Vosper and their group looked at this diversity issue in 2015 again, and it's actually problematic for us. So I just didn't want to, you know, and about 80% of the students are actually reporting gender out of 129,000. So I don't feel like our numbers are skewed, but they are. Clearly, we would like more participation in the research side. So with that, I'm hoping that there might be a question here from the attendees. And otherwise, I can continue to discuss. But Haley, can you help me to kind of field those questions?
Absolutely. So we just have one question so far, and it's just someone asking if we can actually send them a link to that research. So do we have that research available that we could send, Dave?
Oh, good question. And I'll bet you that's a smart person asking the question because they like research and research is important. And the only, you know, we actually, the reason that we do research is to improve. So as we learn from these things, we better be able to talk about them. So yes, the answer is I'm navigating to the Fisdap now, to my Fisdap now, and I can share this tab over here quick. So and now I can see it was a smart person asking this question. Eric Martins from Hennepin County is, I think, very interested in making sure we know all of our all of our data actually matters for something. So, and all the data entry is for something. So if you go to the top page of Fisdap, you will find a tab that says research on it. And one of the tabs is just about what we do, the Research Summit, which we hope you will apply to. That is open right now. And we will be hosting. It happens every February, and as of right now, there's a bunch of folks that are applying. It's first come, first serve for new folks. But kind of proud moment, because if you look, and thanks for updating this, Haley, because it's always a bear to make sure that the last year's research is there, and love that we got a Fisdap project that Leah Tilden and their group did as NIMSY Best Research. But each year they're here, but they're all listed down below. So all you need to do is do a Control F for find, as long as we're tips and tricks, and do the word Preceptor. And there's the NIMSY 2014 Best Research that we did on neuroticism. Oh, that's not right. So there's 16 mentions of preceptors, and here we compared whether or not the preceptor could actually measure. That's a fantastic project, by the way. It's I say it with all humility, it's actually Luke Stanke and Mike Bowen who really pull it all together. The concept that a preceptor can identify bad behavior, meaning that the student is unprofessional and will fail on affect, is something that the entrance exam was able to point out. So the entrance exam can predict which students will actually be exited or failed by a preceptor, and the concept of improved communication and empathy levels, agreeableness, is a way for people to be able to work in teams. When we have students who are not working in teams, preceptors were able to actually identify that. But every single abstract that we've been involved with here. So here's the preceptor bias one. And again, if you click on the poster, if they're available, you should be able to pull up the posters with all of the specifics on the abstract, where we got the ratings, how that was used. And in the case of the Eureka ones, Todd's here, Todd Cage is here, and his poster is right here. So I'm actually amazed that I could find that, but there's the info. I don't know if he used the graphics that I had on that PowerPoint, but happy to share those offline. I know we're coming to the end, and I want to make sure we have more time for questions. So please ask away, and I hope this is helpful as we think about the experiences that our students are having. I hope everybody knows, and maybe I'll be able to pull this up on short notice here, but I hope everybody knows the power of the clinical, the result that sending students to clinical has such amazing byproduct. And we have linked students going to internships in multiple research projects to both pass rates and to improved pass rates on the National Registry, improved pass rates on the EMT readiness exam, and these are all well documented in that research page. But the concept of these ALS field contacts, especially emergency contacts, we learned later, and especially the 4 types of complaints: abdominal pain, chest pain, difficulty breathing, and altered mental status, all 4 of those being a very good differential diagnosis kind of complaints. The more the students see that, the better they do on the exam. So learning that, Ron Lawler led that team, and Kathy Ricketts repeated that for EMT. So we know that the more contacts they have, here's a nice graph, the more contacts they have in the field, the better they do. And there's kind of a sweet spot at about 100 contacts where it doesn't ever level off. They continue to improve, but there's a kind of a moment at 100 patient contacts where it got better. I think, or it averages out. I think it's hard for any program to be able to get to 100 contacts per student, but These have been really fantastic projects that are all possible because we're all actually tracking the data together, and I encourage you to continue to do that. Okay, I think I have a hard stop at 30 minutes, which is very hard to do for an educator. I want to keep talking to you. I want to keep sharing all the great stuff that's been in here. But preceptor training is a requirement for accreditation. And like I said, if you want to be involved, please tell us. But we want to make sure you're at least using the tools that are there, and the online 4-hour training is one aspect that can be very helpful to meet that goal.
Awesome. Thank you, Dave. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We hope to have you join us for the next Tips and Tricks webinars on September 18th and October 2nd. To stay up to date on upcoming webinars or to see recordings of previous webinars, you can visit the URL there, go.fisdap.net/tipsandtricks. There'll be a quick survey after the webinar, so please be sure to let us know your thoughts on today's webinar and if you have any suggestions for future topics. In addition, if you have questions that weren't addressed today, please feel free to submit them there and we will get back to you on them as soon as possible. Thank you, and we hope to see you next time.